are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and today we're traveling the rough seas between art and family with director Steven Spielberg's The Fablemans on this random act of opinion coming up right now. Sometimes, following your heart has a cost, opinion nerds. One of the few things we're likely to ever understand is what inspires us to tell stories. What might seem extraordinary or supernatural all depends on your point of view. For some people, a trip to the movies is just a few hours out of the house on a random Friday night. For others, a trip to the pictures is like visiting another dimension where all things fantastic become real. For some, the story of their families is just a collection of events that happen to have occurred to them, no more or less special than anyone else's. But for others, the events of their lives molded the very fabric of their universe. The people in them, friends and family, can be figures as large and mythic as any Greek hero, and the lessons taken from even the most seemingly inane events can influence how you see the world from that point forward. The difference between a family story and a storied family is in the perspective of the storyteller, as is how those stories will ultimately be shaped. Based on his own life, director Steven Spielberg takes us through the formative years of young Sammy Fabelmans, son of a brilliant computer engineer and an equally brilliant musician. Captured by film at an early age, Sammy is enraptured by a desire to make movies. But in the pursuit of his dreams, he'll have to face both the joy and pain that comes with following your heart as the choices made threaten to tear the world of his family apart. Directed by Steven Spielberg from a screenplay by Spielberg and Tony Kushner, the film stars Michelle Williams, Paul Dano, Seth Rogen, Gabriel LaBelle, Kelly Karsten, Julia Butters, and Judd Hirsch. Quiet on the set! Lights. Cameras. Spoilers, opinion nerds. Anyone who's followed the legendary career of Steven Spielberg knows how much value the director places on family, with many words spent discussing his depictions of the relationships between parents and children. While most well known for his fantasy and adventure films like E.T., AI, and the Indiana Jones series, Spielberg has proven his skills as a dramatic storyteller more than once with films like Lincoln, Munich, and Schindler's List. With The Fablemans, Spielberg turns his cinematic gaze onto himself with a humorous light drama examining his own family's unique experience and how that affected his choice to become a filmmaker. While Spielberg and Kushner's screenplay covers a number of coming-of-age topics for Spielberg's stand-in, Gabriel LaBelle's Sammy, including his introduction to cinema at a young age, his first relationship, and dealing with anti-Semitism in his Northern California high school, the real meat of the film is the complicated relationship between Mother Mitzi, played by Michelle Williams, Father Bert, played by Paul Dano, and family friend Benny, played by Seth Rogen. While the film places Sammy at the intersection between his father's highly technical, problem-solving mind and his mother's passion for expression, it's not a deconstruction of the man himself or of his parents' relationship. Less exploration than journey, the film isn't as much about how people come to certain defining points than it is guiding the audience across the emotional landscape of Sammy's life. Those who yearn for a more intensely detailed examination of the personalities and characters may come away from the film somewhat disappointed, though it should be noted that level of character dissection has never really been Spielberg's interest. Mitzi, Bert, and Sammy are all well-rounded enough characters, with Spielberg coming up just short of idealizing any of them. Though it would be easy for the filmmaker to craft the film in such a manner that the audience feels the need to choose sides between the parents, as surely as Spielberg may have felt the need to do at one point, the film finds a mature balance of empathy for the two, which makes Sammy's frustration all the more palpable. Working with longtime collaborator Janusz Kaminski, Spielberg shoots the film in the dreamy, cinematic style he's become known for. Spielberg and Kaminski's work often has a soft, hazy, technicolor patina that casts a romantic aura over their film's world. Some might think his techniques are old or out of date, but Spielberg still knows how to evoke and provoke with his camera. Gliding in and around the scene, the viewer feels untethered from the ground, adding to that dreamy feeling of classic Hollywood cinema. With its spherical 185 framing, it's not exactly the bigger-than-life approach taken by Sammy's cinematic hero John Ford, given curmudgeonly appealing life in the film by fellow director David Lynch, but it certainly is life seen through a cinematic lens. This is possibly a reflection of Sammy's perspective that goes so far as having the budding picture man dissociate from a tense situation and begin to view it as if he was shooting the scene, the film stock even changing from 35mm to 16mm to emphasize the perspective. Of course, great imagery is only half the experience, and so much of the film rests on the shoulders of Michelle Williams' Mitzi. Mitzi has to be beautiful, passionate, and loving, but also somewhat unhinged, bordering on dangerous at times. Daniel's Bert has to convince that he wouldn't be run over by Mitzi's energy, being soft-spoken but not weak, while holding his own kind of passion that he keeps in reserve. Rogen doesn't quite have the chops to escape himself and become a character, but he's well cast as Benny, especially as he's able to more closely match Williams' energy in the purposeful way that Daniel's Bert does not. Lavelle is convincing enough as Sammy, but he isn't called upon to do much in comparison to Williams and Dano, and as a result attempts to internalize in a way that often leaves him feeling a little flat. This might be close to how Spielberg sees himself, but it makes Sammy a little less interesting than the other characters. Judd Hirsch gives a standout performance as Uncle Boris, mostly because he's the only character that's allowed to be bigger than life, playing as the counterpoint to Jenny Berlin's Hadassah Fableman and illustrating the almost polarized duality of the Fableman family. As Mitzi says, the family is the scientist versus the artist, and despite how hard Mitzi and Bert try to find the middle ground, you can see the toll that takes. All of this leads to an experience that's often humorous, sometimes uncomfortable, but never without a sense of affection. The film's mature outlook on its subject doesn't shy away from the foibles of either parent and tries to show how each side of Sammy's life contributes to who he will eventually become as a reflection of how Spielberg sees himself. Spielberg's approach to cinema is that of a memory, or as the film puts it, a dream we can remember. The use of camera and film with their artifacts on display draws attention to the artifice and enforces the idea that we aren't meant to regard this as a recreation of reality. It looks like a movie and feels like a movie because we're meant to digest it as a movie. The attempt isn't to make cinema into life, it's to make life into cinema, and those are two different things. It's affecting light drama that, while honest about what is ostensibly the dissolution of a family, never becomes overwhelmed with latent grief or anger. Spielberg and his cast make every emotion readable and every motivation understandable. You don't spend any time thinking about how the movie works, so you can put all of your energy into riding the emotional experience. The movie does all the thinking, so you can do all the feeling. This is where Spielberg has always done his best work, and this film is no less for the effort. What I found most interesting about my experience with the film is how affirming it is. There is a lot of love in this movie, both in the text and in the filmmaking. I really enjoyed how the theme of follow your heart is handled because we have a tendency to romanticize the idea, and it just isn't always that simple. I saw the film with my wife on a quiet afternoon. We frequently found ourselves holding hands, sometimes squeezing a little too tightly while laughing and gasping at the film as if we were watching some kind of blockbuster. We probably seemed like we were on something to the other handful of people in the theater, but really we were just high on the experience. I like to hide how easily emotionally manipulated I can be, so I was very happy that the film wasn't being so obviously manipulative I had to push back just to stay even. I walked out of the film with a big old smile on my face, but it wasn't as much a result of the story as it was the filmmaking and the feeling that I had watched an honest-to-God film. That's not a comfortable thing for me to admit, that I often value my impression of the filmmaking over the content of a film itself, but it's true. That doesn't mean I don't appreciate the film's content or the value of what Spielberg wanted to express and share, but I don't relate to Spielberg's experiences either as a creative person, driven, passionate, obsessive, or his experience with his family, or even his experiences as a Jew in the 60s. I can feel what he was sharing. I completely understand the value of the emotional expression and appreciate how it comes through the film, but I don't understand it as a lived experience. I understand it as a piece of storytelling, as a piece of cinema, and I have to wonder what kind of movie person that makes me and whether or not what some people have accused me of being a person that sees style as more important than substance, or even that I'm incapable of recognizing substance alone, is true. I don't think this kind of personal contemplation is what the storyteller had in mind when making the film, but this is part of the cinematic experience as well. I appreciate the film as a film and as a piece of expression for the skill and craft in its storytelling, but I'm very much on the outside of the experience looking in. However, getting a taste of what it's like to be that person driven by their passion, fighting the tug of war between their responsibilities and their calling, that Spielberg can give me a taste of that, no matter how small or impotent when placed against the lived experience, that's cinema as well, and I do get that. So maybe I'm not as superficial as I fear. What ultimately is the Fablemans? Is it a lesson to be learned about what it means to listen to that voice inside telling you who you are and what you want? Is it a story about a boy navigating the rough waters of his parents' erupting life in pursuit of his own passions? Is it a fictional retelling of a life or a memory turned into a dream and then made into a film? a dream we can all remember. Maybe it's all those things, and maybe it's none. The story of the Fablemans, taken as it is from Spielberg's own life, may not seem big enough or important enough to warrant making a film about. But what seems big or important is a matter of perspective. For some people, a trip to the movies is just a way to pass the time. But for others, it can rewire the way they see the world. Where the stories we tell come from isn't important. What is important is that we tell them, because you never know who you're going to affect or how. In the end, they're all just fables, man. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.